We're reading from Mark, chapter 3, starting at verse 7 on page 1427. Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the lake, and a large crowd from Galilee followed. When they heard about all he was doing, many people came to him from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, and the regions across the Jordan and around Tyre and Sidon. Because of the crowd, he told his disciples to have a small boat ready for him, to keep the people from crowding him. For he had healed many, so that those with diseases were pushing forward to touch him. Whenever the impure spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." But he gave them strict orders not to tell others about him. Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority and drive out demons. These are the 12 he appointed: Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. To them he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder. Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Then Jesus entered a house, and again a crowd gathered, so that he and his disciples weren't even able to eat. When his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, "He is out of his mind." And the teachers of the law who came down from Jerusalem said, "He is possessed by Beelzebul, but the prince of demons, he is driving out demons." So Jesus called them over to him and began to speak to them in parables. How can Satan drive out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. If a house is divided against itself, that house cannot stand. And if Satan opposes himself and is divided, he cannot stand. His end has come. In fact, no one can enter a strong man's house without first tying him up. Then he can plunder the strong man's house. Truly I tell you, people can be forgiven all their sins and every slander they utter, but whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will never be forgiven. They are guilty of an eternal sin. He said this because they were saying, "He has an impure spirit." Then Jesus' mother and brothers arrived. Standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, "Your mother and brothers are outside looking for you." "Who are my mother and my brothers?" he asked. Then he looked at those seated in a circle around him and said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thanks very much, Jeanette. Morning, all. It's great to be with you. It's great to be inside. We live in the world of identity checks at the moment. That's so much of what our world is about, is to do with checking identities. We live in a world where everything needs to be verified and confirmed and double-checked to make sure that when I'm doing something, that it's really me and not somebody else. Not just someone who's pretending to be me, not someone who's pretending to be authorised by me. And we have identity checks to protect against that sort of thing. And our world is full of identity checks like this. Every time we want to use our phones, we've moved beyond patterns and pins. We now have fingerprints or facial recognition to prove that it's really us who's using our phone. And every time we log in to a website online, we don't just have a username and password, we have two-factor authentication, where a code sent to our phone, to our email, just to check that it's really us, to prove that it's really us who wants to log in. And every time we make a purchase on our card, our bank runs it through their security system, whether we know about that or not. And sometimes they'll see something unusual and then they'll contact us to see if we really wanted to make a purchase from Uzbekistan or wherever, to check that it's really us who wanted to make that purchase. I don't know how you feel about these things. Maybe you're frustrated by identity checks. Maybe you think they're completely unnecessary. Maybe you find yourself asking, maybe when you call up your energy provider or someone and they want to verify your identity, maybe you ask yourself, why can't they just take my word for it? Don't they know it's me? But I imagine there's times when we're grateful for identity checks, times when we lose our phone, times when we lose our bank card. Because it's times like this that identity checks are going to stop people who from using things that belong to us. Now, in our passage in Mark, Jesus does a bit of relational identity checking in our passage today. Jesus shows us three groups within our passage, and he shows that they're not people who are with him. They're not people who are in relationship with him. First, he shows us those who just see him as good, but not as God. Then he shows us people who see him as mad, and then those who see him as bad. And then Jesus shows us finally one group who is with him because of how they see Jesus and how they respond rightly to him. And so that's the way we're going to work through this passage today. Those who see Jesus as just good, those who see him as mad, those who see him as bad, and then finally those who see him as God and respond rightly. First, those who aren't with Jesus, who just see him as good. And we see this in the context of the big picture Mark gives us at the start of our passage, because we're given a big picture of the impact of Jesus' ministry up to this point. We're given a big view of those who are now following him. Mark sets the scene for us in verse 7. Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the lake, and a large crowd from Galilee followed. And now at this point in Jesus' ministry, the crowds are a constant feature. We see that Jesus' local popularity has continued even after the controversial actions we saw last week. Jesus was forgiving sins, eating with sinners, healing on the Sabbath. After these events, which riled up the local religious leaders, we see that there's still a large crowd from Galilee who follows Jesus and follows him out to the lake. But this large crowd, we're told, isn't just limited to locals. Verse 8. When they heard about all that he was doing, many people came to him from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, and the regions across the Jordan and around Tyre and Sidon. Now, you might be familiar with the names of some of those places like Judea and Jerusalem, and you might be less familiar with the rest. If you're a map person, there's a map. But the point is that the word about Jesus has spread in all directions, north, south, east, and the news about Jesus spread about Jesus because of what people have heard about him, because of what Jesus has been doing. Word has spread that Jesus is good, that Jesus can do good things for people. And so that wherever he goes, people from everywhere want to follow him. And what this means is that by every human measure, this looks like a success story. Any marketing team would love to see a crowd like the one that gathers to see Jesus beside the lake. People from diverse demographics all coming together. People from everywhere coming to see Jesus, coming near to him, reaching out to him, following him. This all looks like a raging success. But then we see Jesus' response to these crowds. In verse 9, he steps away. He stops them from touching him. He boards a boat to create a buffer from the crowd. Why? Well, because Jesus shows that he has a different and better plan for the progress of his ministry. He has a different definition of success than the crowds do. Jesus has a plan for people to not just see him as good, but to see him as God. And this is a plan that comes through the 12 he then calls and chooses, which we'll look at a little later. And I think seeing Jesus as as good and following because of that, and not seeing Jesus as God, that's where most people in Penrith are coming from. Imagine it's where many of us might have come from as well, seeing Jesus as good, but not as God. It's a comfortable position for us to take up. Because if Jesus is just good, then I can come to him for help when I'm going through a tough time because he's good. He can do good things for me. And you might be here today for that reason. There are things going on in your life that you think Jesus can help with because he's good. And he is good. Don't get me wrong. But if Jesus is just good, then it doesn't matter how I treat him. When my tough time passes, I can let Jesus go. And I can ignore him until the next time I need him. That's how I can treat Jesus if he's good, but not God. But Jesus isn't just good, and he is God. And it's only by seeing and hearing that Jesus is God that people like us will respond to him rightly, will keep responding to him rightly. It's only when we see Jesus that way that we'll keep following him regardless of what's happening in our lives. And so that's our first point. The first group that we see, our first group identity are checked by Jesus. Those who aren't with Jesus because they just see him as good, but not God. Second, those who aren't with Jesus, who see him as mad. This is verse 20. Then Jesus entered a house, and again a crowd gathered, so that he and his disciples were not even able to eat. When his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, he is out of his mind. Now, this is actually how we're introduced to Jesus' family here in Mark. We don't get the extended introduction like we get in the other gospel accounts. This is it. This is us meeting Jesus' family. And we meet them as people who say Jesus is out of his mind. They see Jesus as out of control, as mad. And that sounds like something family might say anyway, right? Out of control, mad, yep. But they hear what's happening to Jesus. They hear what he's doing. They hear what he's done to cause these crowds, and they decide that an intervention is needed. Because Jesus obviously isn't in control of this situation. He obviously isn't in control of himself. And so they need to step in and take charge of him for the sake of Jesus and for the sake of the family, their reputation together. And so that's what the family do. They set off from Nazareth to Capernaum to take charge of Jesus, to sort him out, to set him straight. And then we pick up the story at the end of that journey in verse 31. Then Jesus' mother and brothers arrived. Standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. Now, can you imagine this scene? Jesus' mother and brothers, they ring the doorbell and they introduce themselves as Jesus' mother and brothers. Can you imagine the shock, the amazement? This is the woman who gave birth to Jesus. These are the people who grew up with Jesus. The person who answered the door would be beside themselves, thinking they were in the presence of greatness. They wouldn't wash their hands afterwards. And you can imagine the expectation of the messenger going in, the excited response they expected from Jesus as they tell him, Jesus, your mother and brothers are outside looking for you. But as readers, we know why they're here. It's not to come to Jesus because they see who he is. It's not to respond to his call. It's not to sit under his teaching. It's to take charge of Jesus, to call him away from all that so they can control him, sort him out. And when Jesus hears their call, your mother and brothers are outside looking for you, this is how Jesus replies in verse 33. Who are my mother and my brothers? Now, this would have been a shocking thing for someone to say about their family. It would have been shocking back then. It's not much less shocking now. Jesus makes it clear that whoever's at the door, they're not with him. Even though they're his biological family, his flesh and blood, his mother and brothers, Jesus doesn't see them as family. And that would only be slightly less shocking if someone said that about their family now, if you said that about your family now. So why does Jesus say it? Why does Jesus see his mother and brothers this way? Well, it's because of how they see him. Because they think he's mad. Because they want to take control of him. Because they want to tell Jesus what he should be doing. Now, imagine there are people that you know, maybe people you know and love, who treat Jesus like this, who say that they would become Christians if Jesus would just change his mind about a few things, if Jesus was different, if Jesus would just change his thinking to be closer to my thinking, if he would change his view to match my choices, if he would soften what he says about some of my sins. Then I would follow Jesus. Then I would stick with him. And this is what Jesus' biological family want to do. They want to take charge of Jesus. They want Jesus to do what they want. They want to change Jesus to be who they want him to be. But they do these things because they don't really know Jesus. They don't know who he is. And they show that they're not with Jesus. Because those who are with Jesus don't see him that way, don't try and manage him that way. But even as Christians, I think it's possible for us to treat Jesus this way too. So that as I read the Bible, I live out the bits that I like. I take on board the teachings that I'm already obeying. The areas I find easy or that I already agree with, those bits are fine. Thank you, Jesus. But then I ignore the bits that challenge me, the bits that tell me to change my mind or my behaviour. Now, I might not be as blunt as to say that Jesus is mad, but my problem in responding to him might not be far away from his family. You and I need to remember who Jesus is and who we are in relation to him, so that when we hear his teaching, we'll be changed by him and not expect him to change for us. Now, the miraculous thing is that later on, some of Jesus' biological family did change how they saw Jesus and were changed by him. Jesus' mother, Mary, and his brother, James, both saw the risen Jesus. And in seeing the risen Jesus, they responded rightly to him. They became Jesus' mother and brother. But as Jesus shows here, even at that future point, beyond his resurrection, their relationship with him wasn't a natural one, wasn't an automatic one. It was supernatural. Their relationship with Jesus' family began like ours does, when we see who Jesus is and who we are in relation to him. Just like us, they became his family by grace, not by right. They came to be his family through faith in Jesus as the Son of God, because that's who he is. And that's our second point, our second group identity checked by Jesus. Those who aren't with Jesus will see him as mad and try and control him. Third, those who aren't with Jesus see him as bad. As we know already in our passage, word about Jesus and what he'd been doing had gone far and wide, and we see that it's even reached the religious leaders in Jerusalem. So they've come up a long way north to Capernaum, and they've joined the crowds. And as they join the crowds, they share their conclusion about Jesus, specifically about the source of his authority. This is verse 22, just back a little bit. Verse 22. And the teachers of the law who came down from Jerusalem said, "He's possessed by Beelzebul, by the prince of demons. He is driving out demons." Now, this is a surprising conclusion. And I think it's a little bit different from the conclusion we might expect from Jesus' opponents. Lots of people I speak with doubt the miraculous things that Jesus did, the healings, the demons, and the resurrection. Those are usually at the top of the list. But the teachers of the law from Jerusalem, they don't have a problem with miracles. They don't doubt what Jesus has done. They can't deny his power to heal. They can't deny his power to drive out demons, because everyone has seen Jesus doing those things. But they can put forward an alternative power source for what has been seen. And that's what they do. They say that Jesus is empowered by Satan. That Jesus can drive out demons because he's possessed, because he's controlled by the prince of demons. But Jesus goes to show that this suggestion is just stupid. That's Jesus' point. Verse 26, he says, "And if Satan opposes himself and is divided, he cannot stand. His end has come." That's what the allegation is. If Jesus is powered by Satan, then Satan is attacking himself. And if Jesus was somehow empowered by Satan, like they suggest, why would he empower Jesus to drive out his own demons? It's like an army attacking its own people. It's like a team attacking their own players. That will never be a successful strategy. But since Jesus is actually driving out demons, if he has the power to do that, then there's only one other explanation: that Jesus is stronger than Satan. And that's what Jesus describes in verse 27. Jesus says, "In fact, no one can enter a strong man's house without first tying him up. Then he can plunder the strong man's house." Now, the picture that Jesus gives here is of what he's come to do. Jesus shows that he's the one he's talking about here. Jesus is the one who enters the strong man's house. Jesus has entered the house that in some sense belongs to Satan, the world where people are enslaved by Satan. And Jesus says that he's come and he's tied up Satan, he's defeated his demons, and having done that, now Jesus is taking Satan's stuff. And that's what Jesus has come to do. That's what Jesus has shown his power to do. No one can stop him. It's because Jesus is the Son of God. He's the King of God's kingdom. And what Jesus describes here is coming into the world, this dealing with God's enemies, this rescuing of people. That's what Jesus has done for us. In Mark's gospel, we see Jesus' strength over spiritual beings and over Satan. We see him releasing people from the power of demons and impure spirits. And as we see these things in Mark, we can know that this same strength has been used to save us, to set us free from any claim that Satan has over us, to set us free to be with Jesus, to belong to Jesus, to be part of Jesus' kingdom, to be members of his family. And this spiritual rescue is what we give thanks for when we pray our church prayer. Might remember part of it. Thank you that through Jesus' death and resurrection, you have rescued us from the dominion of darkness. Thank you that you have brought us into the kingdom of your Son. This is what has happened to us. This is what Jesus has done for us. Because he is the stronger man. That's what he's come to do. But then how tragic is it for us to come back to the conclusion of the teachers of the law? That it's possible to see Jesus' strength, to see him setting people free, but to say that he's doing it for Satan as a member of Satan's team with Satan's permission and power. It's just crazy. And Jesus doesn't let this conclusion slide. He shares just how sinful it is as he talks about it as an eternal sin. Let's take a look at verse 28 slowly. Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, people can be forgiven all their sins and every slander they utter." Just pause there, because that's what Jesus has come to give us: forgiveness. That's what his rescue is all about. There isn't a word you could say, an action you could do that can't be forgiven by Jesus, that can't be dealt with through his death on the cross. And so if you want that forgiveness from Jesus, if you want to be sure that you have that forgiveness from Jesus, then you don't have to worry about what comes next. It's not a concern for you. But Jesus goes on, this is what he says in verse 29. But whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will never be forgiven. They are guilty of an eternal sin. Now, this is the warning to people who aren't with Jesus, those who are far away from wanting to be with Jesus, as far away as these teachers of the law. Jesus warns that if people continue with their conclusion that Jesus is bad, that he's been sent by Satan, that he's been empowered by evil spirits instead of the Holy Spirit, then they very obviously aren't with Jesus. They very obviously have rejected Jesus' rescue. And if they continue to think this way about Jesus, if they continue to see Jesus as bad, then there is no forgiveness available from Jesus for them. They don't want him. And instead, at the end of this life, they will face the Jesus they've rejected, and they'll be rejected by him, found guilty by him. Why? Because they've glimpsed the goodness of God in Jesus. They've seen the goodness of Jesus in all that he's come to do, and they've concluded that he is evil. They've called him bad, demonic, of the devil. You can't be more wrong than that. Now, in this passage, we've seen Jesus identity checking. Most of our passage, our time has been spent showing us those who aren't with Jesus, those who aren't with Jesus because they see him as just good or as mad or as bad. But let's finish by seeing those who are with Jesus, those who don't just see Jesus as good, who don't see him as mad or bad because they see him as God. Now, we see those who are with Jesus in answer to his question in verse 33. Who are my mother and my brothers? He asked. Then he looked at those seated in a circle around him and said, here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother. And what Jesus shows us here is that there is a group of people who are with him, who are in relationship with him. They've come to Jesus like every other group that we've seen, like the crowds from everywhere, like Jesus' family from Nazareth, like the teachers of the law from Jerusalem. They've all come to Jesus. But as we track back, we see how this group have come to him, why they're sitting with Jesus, why they're described as doing God's will. Well, it's to do with how they've responded to Jesus, the Son of God. Come back with me to verse 13 as we see how this starts. Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. Now, this is what makes the people around Jesus different from the crowd, the family, and the teachers of the law. See, the 12 that Jesus calls are uniquely called by Jesus. And this is what we've seen already in Mark. Jesus came to the fishermen. Jesus came to Levi, the tax collector. He called each of them, come, follow me. And each of them heard Jesus call and followed him. And that's what it meant for them to do God's will, to respond to the call of Jesus. And as we see in Mark's list of names of the 12 that follow, the call of Jesus, the Son of God, has changed their lives. And in some cases, it's changed their names. Jesus called them so that they'd be the first of many who would be like this, who would be with Jesus. And this is what we see in verse 14. He appointed 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. This is then what we see in action at the end of the chapter. as these 12 who are called by Jesus are now with Jesus, physically with him, and assured by Jesus that they're with him, that they are his brother and sister and mother. Because the difference here is that they are doing the will of God. They are responding rightly to Jesus as the Son of God, as the King of God's kingdom. And as we wrap up, this is why Jesus' identity checking matters to us. Why we care so much about the people Jesus says aren't with him. Because at the end of the day, Jesus is the one who knows. He's the one who knows our hearts, he knows how we see him. He knows our response to him. And he knows when our response to him is doing God's will or not. He knows that people can see him as good but not God, as mad or as bad. And though all of these responses look different, they're all from people who are in the same spiritual situation. People who are out of Jesus' family, who are outside of Jesus' kingdom. And it's for their sake and ours that we need to hear who Jesus says is with him. Those who are with him are enabled by Jesus to respond to his call, enabled by Jesus to do God's will, enabled by Jesus to belong to his family. And that's what we see starting with the 12, who Jesus calls to be with him. In appointing them, Jesus shows us the start of his kingdom, shows us his plan for how his kingdom will grow, will include more people like them, more people who will see who Jesus is through their sharing about him, more people who will join them in doing God's will, in responding rightly to Jesus, as they and we see him as the Son of God. Now, it's amazing to think that in this passage we are part of this, that we are part of what Jesus had in mind when he came near to the 12, when he called them to be with him. It's amazing to think that we are part of what Jesus had in mind when he sent them out to preach. To think that through them, Jesus has enabled crowds of diverse people like us to see and hear who Jesus is. Diverse crowds of people like us who are now forgiven, set free by Jesus, brought into Jesus' kingdom, made members of Jesus' family. If you've trusted in Jesus, this is what Jesus has made you to be, sees you to be. Even if everyone else sees you as good or as mad or as bad, Jesus sees you as his because of the way that you have been enabled to see him and follow him. And is it a privilege for people like us to be able to continue in what we see here, to continue to have that family resemblance, to do God's will by responding to Jesus, being brought in by Jesus, sent out by Jesus, as Jesus continues to call people who see him as just good or mad or bad, to see him instead as the Son of God, the King of God's kingdom. Now we're going to respond to what we've looked at together, what we've heard together by singing, and we're going to sing the song, We Are His People. What wonderful truths for us to sing together. Please stand.